Mr. Speaker, Mr. Governor, Minister for Fuel, Power and Natural Resources, Managing Director, Excellencies, gentlemen, before I reply to the speech of the Managing Director, I have three announcements to make. One relates to the University of Peshawar, and I see the Vice Chancellor is here. There is a donation of rupees 2 lakhs which was granted to the university on my previous visit, and I have much pleasure now in handing it over to you. Give it to me. The other relates to an agreement between the provincial government and the central government of setting up of a university in Dera Ismail Khan. Some terms and conditions have been incorporated in the agreement, which has been duly signed by the Minister for Education and the Chief Minister of Northwest Frontier Province, so that the work on the university can begin as soon as possible. The third relates to the magnificent work that the police are doing in this province. There is a law and order situation here due to a variety of reasons. The police force is thin and it requires augmentation, better equipment. Nevertheless, despite these deficiencies, the police force is doing its best to cope with the law and order situation. On my previous visit to this province, when I came here on the 19th of last month and left on the 26th of November, I had intended to make a small contribution to the police force of the frontier province for the extra work they had to do during that period, and also to cope with the problems of law and order. I now propose to make a token and a modest contribution of 100,000 rupees to the police force of Northwest Frontier Province. It gives me great pleasure to be in your midst on the occasion of the inauguration of the sui gas supply to the Northwest Frontier Province. This day marks the completion of the pipeline from Karachi to Peshawar. The extension of natural gas to the Northwest Frontier Province will bring with it many economic and social benefits. It will provide clean and inexpensive fuel. Its supply will be fully reliable and there will be no artificial scarcity. Incidentally, it will also release bagasse, which is at present being used as a fuel to serve as a raw material in paper industry. In the course of time, gas may also be used as feedstock for petrochemical industries. The government is committed to a program of uplift of the masses and is determined to remove invidious and unjust inequalities and to bring up the economically underdeveloped regions of the country. We have set up the Tribal Development Corporation for the amelioration of the economic conditions of the tribal areas, and quite recently I personally visited the far-flung places in the Northwest Frontier Province and the tribal belt, as well as those in the northern areas, to apprise myself of the conditions prevailing there. I take this opportunity of repeating my assurance that we will leave no stone unturned in bettering the lot of the people of the underdeveloped areas, indeed of the whole nation. With these objectives, the government has, so far as natural gas is concerned, taken up various projects to extend the pipelines to the underdeveloped regions of the country, and where this is not possible, to supply them liquefied petroleum gas so that the benefits of gas may be enjoyed by all. It is true that our efforts for the search of oil have not so far been rewarded adequately, but large reserves of natural gas have been discovered and efforts are afoot to search for new oil and gas reserves both on land and in the offshore areas. Oil and Gas Development Corporation and some other prospecting companies are carrying out geological studies in the Dera Ismail Khan, Banu, Kohat and North Waziristan areas with the object of locating possible oil and gas reserves. It has been stated that the recoverable reserves of gas so far discovered are estimated to be about 16.5 million cubic feet, and out of these less than 7% have so far been consumed. This undoubtedly is a very slow rate of utilization, particularly when we are dependent on oil imports which are rising every year. The share of natural gas in the overall energy consumption in Pakistan is only about 35%. This calls for maximizing our efforts to increase the utilization of natural gas so that a large share of our energy requirement is met by gas, thereby saving hard-earned foreign exchange being spent on the import of oil. Top priority needs to be accorded to the pipeline expansion, particularly to connect new areas and the underdeveloped regions in other provinces as well. I am pleased to learn about the progress made by Sui Northern Gas Pipeline Limited since its inception in 1964. The company has extended its transmission system from 301 to 1,183 miles after an investment of over rupees 57 crores. I am also happy to know about the cordial relations between the management and the workers of the company. This must have substantially contributed to the rapid development achieved by the company in such a short period of time. I hope that Sui Northern will continue to fulfill its role in the future expansion program for the supply of gas in the widest area and to the largest number of consumers for the benefit and welfare of our people. Yes, I've received a request in a telegram just before I came here. It reads, on the happy occasion of Sui Gas Inauguration Day in the Northwest Frontier Province, please declare 1 month extra salary to Sui Northern Gas subordinate staff. Thanks. I've consulted the managing director and he says that half a month's salary can be given. So it is not the full month's salary, but half a month's salary. Thank you very much. Assalamu alaikum. I cannot begin to speak today on any subject without first commenting on the sad and melancholy events of the 23rd of March. The 23rd of March is the National Day of Pakistan. It was on this day, 33 years ago, that the leadership of the Muslim League under the banner of the Quaid-e-Azam met at Lahore to pass the historic Pakistan resolution. And since that eventful day, the Muslims of the subcontinent have struggled relentlessly and heroically in the pursuit of the fulfillment of that resolution. And they triumphed over overwhelming odds. At times the odds were so great that it appeared as if the struggle would not reach its culmination, but it did. Under the indomitable leadership of Mr. Muhammad Ali Jinnah, our Quaid-e-Azam, Pakistan was achieved. And in these 25 years of tumultuous existence, tragically we have not yet been able to evolve a sensible equilibrium for our people and for our progeny. The events of December 1971 were traumatic, were most tragic, and many of us had hoped that from this terrible experience we would have learnt a number of fundamental lessons. And one of those lessons was to give shape and stability to what is left of Pakistan. to act within certain disciplined norms of democracy, to accept the other point of view, to be tolerant to the wishes of the majority as long as the majority is exercised through its elected representatives for a period of time, to live in a spirit of accommodation, of give and take. But unfortunately it seems that we have not yet learnt those basic lessons. Otherwise I fail to understand why some of our friends, or shall we say all of us, should have precipitated what took place on the 23rd of this month. I do not want to dilate on the events. A number of ministers have spoken on the subject. 2 governors have addressed you on this matter. Our friends in the opposition have given their version of it. I'd only like to say this much, that the 23rd of March is a day of celebration, or it ought to be a day of celebration and rejoicing. And for this reason, we participated in the parade, we held a parade, the armed forces showed their caliber, their worth, their magnificence on the parade ground. Many people came to participate in the rejoicing in the spirit of resuscitation for what is left of Pakistan. And it could not therefore be in our minds to mar this fine day by unpleasant events or by fratricidal tussles. And for this reason, we not only appealed to our friends in the opposition, we beseeched them to hold the day to hold their meeting 24 hours later. They could have said the same things that they wanted to say on the 23rd, and perhaps it would have been more appropriate for them to fulminate a day later than on the day which should be symbolic of national unity. They would not have in any way been prevented from doing so. We told them that the police would be extremely busy with the parade and with other arrangements, and that it would not be possible to provide the necessary security arrangements. We had also heard that about 10 to 15,000 armed people were to come in lorries and buses from Charsada and Sahabi. These people did come. They indulged in vitriolic and abusive slogan mongering in the streets, and it could not be called a public meeting. If it was a public meeting, it was a public meeting on wheels. It was an invasion. But even so, we tried to pacify the situation. We did not want to give some of the details about the arrangements. Some of our friends have said that the persons who came were searched and arms were not recovered from them. Arms were recovered from some of them, but the bulk of the arms were brought into Rawalpindi 2 days before the public meeting and were handed over to people who came on the day of the public meeting to them for the public meeting. We didn't go into all these details. We tried to, as I said, pacify the situation. But despite our efforts, our friends are still trying to fan parochialism and try to take advantage of a perverse development. So much so that I hear that yesterday People's Party offices have been ransacked by masked men in Charsada and Utmanzai. I do not believe that there should be any retaliation. There are offices of other parties throughout the country, and I would request my friends, the workers of my party, that not to take any retaliatory measures. One retaliation leads to another, and the spiral keeps mounting. We therefore do not like to see the situation get into some excitable and uncontrollable breath. We'd like to bring it under control. We'd like to see normal conditions restored. And for this reason, I would like to appeal to all my friends and associates throughout the country that they should take a tolerant view of what has happened yesterday in Utmanzai and Charsada, and not to hit back. We cannot hit back our own brethren, our own flesh and blood. That is quite puerile. I would also request our friends in the opposition not to become desperate or lose their sense of balance and equanimity, but to retain a sense of composure, a sense of perspective, and to look at the problems of the country from that point of view. My friends, you might say that it's all very well to preach and to indulge in sanctimonious speeches, but what is the evidence of these words in tangible action? How can the sincerity of what you say be measured in concrete terms? It is difficult for me to make out a case for our own government, for your government. It is for you to judge. But at the same time, let me briefly mention the attitude of your government since it came into office towards the opposition in general and towards the whole concept of a democratic dispensation. You will recall that the day I assumed office, on that very day, without negotiations, without preconditions, without any bargaining or negotiation of give and take, of extracting a pound of flesh, unilaterally we lifted the ban on the National Awami Party, a ban that had been imposed by a previous government. If we had a hostile attitude, we could have well taken the position that it will take us some time to consider why the previous government had imposed the ban. We could have taken the position that we will have to sift and examine the evidence on the basis of which the previous government imposed the ban on the National Awami Party. But we did not take that position. We thought we were starting with a clean slate, beginning anew, and that it would be a good thing for bygones to be bygones, although there was some justification to be cautious. So we unilaterally and in good faith lifted the ban on the National Awami Party, imposed not by our government but imposed by a previous government. What did we do after that? We invited our friends from the frontier and Balochistan who in coalition claimed to have a majority, and we held discussions with them. And arising out of those discussions, we reached an agreement for the formation of provincial governments in the provinces of Balochistan and the Northwest Frontier Province, as well as certain other allied important points of agreement were reached through negotiations. Soon after the agreement had been concluded, the leaders of the National Awami Party began to give their own interpretations to the agreement. The agreement was self-evident, it was crystal clear, their point of view was expressed, our point of view was expressed, and the final agreement that had been reached had been written down, these had been published. Nevertheless, the National Awami Party began to give its own interpretations to the agreement, which were not wholly consonant with the letter and spirit of the agreement. What did we do? We did not break the negotiations. We did not, from our side, also violate the agreement, because once an agreement is violated by one party, the other party is also absorbed from the commitments of that agreement. But we did not take that position. With patience and with tolerance, so much so that some of our friends in the National Awami Party began to think that the government was basically a weak government and that it was susceptible to pressure. We did not mind even those false conclusions that were reached by them in their enthusiasm. And in all humility, I travelled all the way to Peshawar to have another round of discussions with our friends. I was under no moral obligation to do this, either politically or otherwise, but nevertheless, again out of the spirit of consensus, arising out of the lessons that we had learned from the tragedy of East Pakistan, I swallowed not my pride, but the pride of your government and the pride of principles to some extent. You can never swallow your principles, but to some extent, and we went to Peshawar. I would like to tell you that in the negotiations in Peshawar, our friends were most hostile, they were provocative, they did not for a moment take into account that they were addressing the first elected head of government and state this country has seen in its 25 years existence. Nevertheless, we smiled it out. We said, all right, we'll sit again and arrive at another agreement. And in a lugubrious process of negotiations, we arrived at yet another agreement with them. In this agreement, we went as far as to give these provincial governments the anchorage of having their own governor. Their majority in a coalition was fragile, it was tenuous, and so they needed some anchorage, some support. And for the first time in the history of the subcontinent, indeed for the first time in the history of the British Commonwealth states, because the same pattern applies for all the British Commonwealth states, whether they are inside the Commonwealth or outside the Commonwealth, the constitutional arrangements have been the same from the beginning. We gave them governors of their own choice and from their own parties. This was unprecedented. Many of my friends told me that I was taking too great a risk and that I will have no independent agency of knowing of what was happening in those two provinces. I nevertheless, in good faith, agreed to take this unusual, this extraordinary step, this step which in legal phraseology is called sui generis, and gave to the two provinces governors of their own party and of their own choice. And in the 9 to 10 months that our friends were in office, to what extent the two governors acted as agents to the president is in itself a comedy of a unique nature. But we leave that also aside. What about our attitude towards the opposition in general? This is towards our, I have just related briefly, very briefly, about our attitude towards the two political parties which together form the governments in Balochistan and the frontier. But I would now like to touch upon our attitude to the opposition in general. Let me tell you briefly again, without violating confidence of the discussions we've had with quite a number of them. And if I were to place those discussions before you, there would be no need for me to make a long speech, but that will not be done. One of the leaders of the opposition was anxious or wanted to leave the country and serve the country from abroad, and we immediately agreed and we gave him an important position. Another leader of the opposition, who is today in the forefront of all that is happening, he met me in Murray with the gentleman who has gone to London, and he told me that he was fed up with politics and he wanted to retire from internal politics, and he wanted the government, he wanted us to provide him a position abroad. Now I can tell you most sincerely that we did our best to try and get him this position. It was not in our hands. Many other countries had to decide. But on our part, we made a sincere effort to give him this position. We did not succeed, because as I told you just now, that the decision was not in our hands. A number of other countries had also to participate in the decision for that post. And since we did not succeed, apparently he thinks that we have not played cricket with him. But we did play cricket, and there is evidence of it. However, we leave that aside also. Another stalwart now in the opposition, he came and he sang my praises. And in the National Assembly, this National Assembly, the same man who's attacking us today, he said that I'm so popular in his house that adorned in all the rooms of my photographs, and that his children worship me, and that his family worships me. These are speeches that our friend has made in the National Assembly. And he came to me with also certain personal matters. I told him that I would try to accommodate him within the norms of justice and equity. Apparently this was not possible. And he has now got so irritated and angry that he sees nothing but disaster in front of everyone's face. But the beginnings of the dispute were of a very trivial nature. And of course then there are our good friends from my own party who were elected to the National Assembly, how they were elected, under what circumstances they were elected. That is not only for them to know, and they know it, but those who cast the votes for them. Here they can come and make brave statements about their strength and about their leadership qualities. But the people back in their own constituencies, the nameless ones, the individuals who voted for them, they know better. They know on what considerations and on what grounds they cast their vote for them. They know when they asked for the ballot paper having the sword, why they asked for the ballot paper having the sword. But I don't want to go into that also, because my object is not to be acrimonious. I'm just trying to tell you about our general attitude towards the opposition. Any opposition leader, whether he's an MNA or if he's even a worker of another party, I have tried to meet him. I've tried to accommodate to their point of view. I have given meetings and interviews to most of them. I have met them with respect. I have met them as equals. And that is because we believe in the democratic traditions. But it's not possible to satisfy each and every individual aspiration, and especially when those aspirations are unreasonable and extremely high. But nevertheless, we have done our best within the limits of equity, as I said, and the propriety of good government to accommodate their point of view. However, when that's not possible, they find here or there some vague or nebulous basis to try and give vent to their anger and their disappointment. Before going to Simla, I called almost all members of the opposition to Murray, and I had marathon discussions with them. I met all of them. I asked them to give me their point of view. I gave them my point of view. We discussed the matters, the question of peace with India, question of prisoners of wars, withdrawal of forces, recognition of Bangladesh, all these questions I discussed with them. I was under no obligation as the leader of the majority party to hold these discussions. Nevertheless, I invited all of them and I held these discussions with them in a spirit again of accommodation, of trying to accommodate their point of view. After coming back from Simla, I immediately took the Simla agreement to the National Assembly. There is nothing in the interim constitution for us to take the agreement to the National Assembly. There is no provision that the agreement must be subject to the approval of the National Assembly. Nevertheless, out of a spirit of democratic tradition, accommodation, compromise, and out of the need to arrive at consensus, I took the Simla agreement to the National Assembly and had it debated by the National Assembly threadbare, without restriction, for a period of 4 to 5 days. Here again, we went forward, submitted to the National Assembly, to the democratic procedures, in order to create new customs, new traditions for orderly, decent and good government in Pakistan. After that, we invited all the members in the National Assembly who represented political parties or the independents to a conference on the principles of the Constitution. We held 4 days discussion with all the representatives inside the National Assembly on the principles of the Constitution. Here again, we held minute, threadbare discussions. And on the 20th of October, 1972, we arrived at a unanimous agreement on the principles of the Constitution. And let me tell you, and this cannot be rebutted or refuted by the opposition, that most of the agreements, most of the suggestions incorporated in the agreements emanated from the opposition. It was out of a spirit of conciliation and compromise that we went to the edge of the precipice in order to arrive at a consensus with the opposition. Although we were the majority party, although there was no need for us, technically speaking, to arrive at this consensus, nevertheless, out of the same considerations that I have repeatedly mentioned, and because we want to build Pakistan into a strong and formidable fortress, we arrived at an agreement of the principles of the Constitution. These principles were hailed by the leaders of the opposition. They gave statements, they gave broadcasts upholding the principles of the Constitution. And after that, you know what happened. I do not have to go into that story. But even after that, even after they resiled and retracted from their own given word, why should I say given word, from their own written word, signed, sealed and delivered, even after that, and you can always find an excuse. You can find an excuse to violate the most sacred of books. People violate the most holy of books and they give some excuse or the other. Whether they are Christians, Jews or Muslims, they give some reason or the other. So they can give some reason or the other to violate the agreement, but objectively, the common man knows that there is no justification for them to have violated the agreement. But after that, also, we took a conciliatory position. So much so that Mr. Bizenjo, my friend, he approached the governor of Punjab and told him that he and the president of the National Awami Party wanted to have a settlement and that we should meet to have further discussions for a settlement. I told the governor of Khar, I've got no objection to meet them for this purpose. So we met at Lahore. And in Lahore, the president of the National Awami Party told me that the question of the two-third majority was not an important question, and that there were certain little things that had to be done, certain face savers that had to be found only to be able to convince their firebrands and their militant elements to accept the constitutional award and accord with some minor modifications, which he termed as face saver. And he told me that if Mr. Bizenjo and Mr. Rafi Raza get together, there will be no difficulty whatsoever for them to arrive at a settlement. And he said that, well, as far as democracy is concerned, that is what we have to tell the public. I am a feudal, you are a feudal, and therefore we are basically feudal, and as far as democracy is concerned, that's only for public meetings. I only smiled and I told him, all right, I will ask Mr. Rafi Raza to meet Mr. Bizenjo. And the president of the National Awami Party told me, this is a great relief now and we can get on with the job. When he left me and the governor of Punjab, he gave a statement to the press and he said, the Kissingers have met to sort out the technicalities. Therefore, a second informal agreement was reached. Not only the agreement of the 20th of October, which you all know, but another informal agreement was reached. I say it was an informal agreement because I told the two gentlemen that, you know, there's a saying in English, once bitten, twice shy. Now, although we have agreed informally to these modifications, we are not going to put them to the people. You put them to the people by getting your working committee or your council to suggest these modifications, and once your working committee or your council suggests these modifications, we will accept them. But they will not come as our proposals, because we cannot in any way reopen the accord. Our hands have been bitten. And they said, all right, we'll put it to our working committee and there'll be no problem. Soon thereafter, they met and they sent us a reply that 2 or 3 young boys from Sindh and 2 or 3 young boys from Punjab were not agreeable to the modifications. they were told by us that you are the leaders, these are minor modifications. How can you allow, as you say, 2 or 3 young boys from Sindh or 2 or 3 young boys from Punjab to come in the way of such a fundamental matter? You can convince them. You can tell them that after all, you are finally responsible as leaders. And in any case, your party does not have a majority in Punjab and Sindh. You claim to have a majority in Balochistan and Frontier, although you don't have a majority in Balochistan and Frontier. But you nevertheless put on those airs that you have a majority in Balochistan and Frontier. And can't you then tell them that in any case, you are not the majority party of the electorate as far as Sindh and Punjab are concerned, and then you leave it to 2 or 3 boys to torpedo and to break down the whole national edifice? I said, at this rate, how can Pakistan hope to move forward? But they said, well, we can't help it. Now we cannot do anything more. But I'm telling you about our attitude. I'm telling you about their attitude. That is not all. Inside the committee, which had to deal with the constitution, the draft committee on the constitution, where all parties are represented, in that committee, a draft constitution came before the nation, approved by all the parties with 1 or 2 dissenting notes, and dissenting notes are written in all important documents. And finally, we took the position that all right, we will go to the National Assembly in Dhaka, provided our point of view is heard, and if it is considered to be reasonable by the majority, that it is accepted. That was finally the only condition that we put forward, which was really no condition, to a country that was divided into 2 parts, where the representative of one part of that wing of that country wanted to impose a confederal constitution. That means impose its dictatorship on the other wing, without the other wing having any voice in the formulation of that constitution. At that time, these friends of ours said, never mind. Whatever Mujibur Rahman wants to give, he has a right to give because he constitutes the majority. Now why are they saying that if even one member from Balochistan does not vote, it will not form a part of the federal structure? This is a federal constitution. This is not a confederal constitution. But even in a federal constitution, which is a constitution for one state and not for 2 states, they are taking the position that even if one member from Balochistan refuses to participate, then that constitution is not binding on Balochistan. When we said that we are a majority from Punjab and Sindh, which were the 2 most populous provinces of Pakistan, both in the Central Assembly as well in the provincial assemblies, at that time they said we are impeding the task of constitution making and coming in the way of the majority party, which was East Pakistan. Very strange that these people should have the audacity, that they should have the effrontery to indulge in this kind of double dealing. I tell you quite frankly, that never before in my life have I come across a norm of politics so lacking in scruples, so totally devoid of integrity. My dear friends, I say this because we stand by principles. We have always stood by principles. Principles to us are sacred. Because principles are sacred, we can, within the limitations of those principles, be flexible. Now, they tell us that we should recognize this UDI. I don't call it UDF because it is really a unilateral declaration of illegality, like the UDI of Rhodesia. This is a unilateral declaration of illegality. They tell us that we should deal with the UDI. I would have no objection to dealing with the UDI. This is no new monster that has come into being which terrifies us. But there are certain reasons why we cannot deal with the UDI. There are certain reasons based on principle. In the first place, UDI comprises of people who have been defeated in elections, like my friend Nawabzada Nasrullah Khan, people who were too afraid of contesting the elections, and I do not want to name them because they are saintly people, and a motley group of individuals. We recognize a political personality rooted in a political background and in a political mooring and a political situation. We cannot suddenly recognize little weasels that appear here and now. Pop, they come up, and pop, they go down. This has been our attitude from the beginning. You take the attitude of my party, party to DAC, Democratic Action Committee, which was set up in Dhaka. Many of these friends of ours joined DAC. We refused to go to DAC. We said
We are prepared to discuss with political parties and political personalities separately. We are a political party. We cannot merge our political party, our political identity, our political struggle with something else for a short period of time which comes into being on account of an expedient ambition. Not for any lasting purpose or for lasting principles. That is a political party that goes through the whole vicissitude of life, the ebb and flow of political life, whether there's martial law, whether there's democracy, whether there's dictatorship, whether there's war and peace. That is the role of a political party. But not suddenly things that emerge for expedient considerations. Therefore, we did not deal with DAC for this reason. For the same reason, I did not go to the Round Table Conference. Because the Round Table Conference was not a conference based on principles. The whole object of the Round Table Conference was to keep afloat an individual who had been rejected by the people. How could we participate in that conglomeration of vehicles of expediency when we had known that the people had given their verdict against the perpetuation of that discredited individual? Therefore, we didn't touch the Round Table Conference. We kept our separate identity. Then, my friends, there came the combined opposition party during Yahya Khan's time. Again, these people got together. Not for any principles, but just to keep the People's Party out of office, out of power. Because the People's Party was the People's Party. Because the People's Party wanted to bring about reforms and changes. Therefore, they all got together. And they formed the COP. But we didn't deal with the COP. We refused to deal with the COP. For the same reason. So when we say we don't want to deal with UDI, that doesn't mean that we are allergic, that we have become frightened of this monster that has suddenly arisen. Whole approach and conviction to politics, that we will deal with recognized political entities. We will deal with Muslim League, we will deal with NAP, we will deal with Convention Muslim League, we will deal with Jamaat-e-Islam, because they are recognized political personalities which do not suddenly, out of some expedient, necessity, conglomerate and get together to pressurize and blackmail established authority, government established constitutionally by law. For this reason, we cannot deal with UDI as such, but that presents no problems. Constitution is to be made inside the assembly, by the assembly, not by the UDI, by people who have been rejected by the electorate. We are therefore prepared to talk and hold discussions with members of the National Assembly, leaders of political parties in the National Assembly. But we cannot deal with any body that suddenly emerges for an expedient cause and for purposes of blackmail, and that does not enjoy the mandate of the people. So there is no deadlock here. I've given the reasons why we cannot deal with this body. At the same time, the substance of the matter is something which we are quite competent to discuss inside the National Assembly with some of the individuals who claim to be today a part of this transient, passing little arrangement. Now, ladies and gentlemen, I've spoken for a great deal of time, but I've spoken to you after a long time, and I'm making an appeal to everyone, to every citizen of Pakistan, to every man, woman and child, to the laborer, to my peasant friends, and to the ladies, to the women, to the children, to every citizen of Pakistan, as I said. But most of all, I'd like to speak to the students, appeal to them, the younger generation that was ever so kind to me. This is a generation which I adore, and I'm terribly fond of this generation. I can never forget that the youth of Pakistan gave me unanimous support when I left Ayub Khan's government in 1966.